From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Breaking this hour, Kamala Harris is now in a statistical tie with Donald Trump across the 7 key swing states that will decide the election. Bloomberg and Morning Consult's new poll just out showing her leading or in a dead heat with Trump in each battleground, except Pennsylvania and North Carolina.
This as Harris lands in Atlanta for a rally in the key state of Georgia. We'll have more with our political panel and discuss her candidacy's possible impact down the ballot with Congresswoman Suzan DelBene, chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
And Israel strikes Hezbollah near the suburbs of Beirut in retaliation for the weekend rocket attack that killed 12 young people in the Golan Heights. We'll get reaction from Jennifer Kavanagh of Defense Priorities. But we begin on this Tuesday edition of Balance of Power with breaking news. The new Bloomberg News Morning Consult swing state poll showing Vice President Kamala Harris indeed closing the gap in most of the states that will decide this election. Joining us now with more on the new swing state numbers, Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, who just finished editing the copy on the terminal and online. Wendy, great work, and thanks for having us here. Just to start broadly here, remarkable to see such a seismic change in just a week with a new candidate on the top of the ticket. What's got your attention here?
Well, that's just what it is, Joe. It is a seismic shift. The motivation quotient, the number of voters who said they were now more motivated to vote, and they are exactly the voters the Democrats need to win an election. They are voters under 34. They are Hispanic voters. They are black voters. That is sort of the Obama coalition that led him to the White House in 2008. And those people were the people Biden was losing in droves. Young people were upset mostly about the war in Gaza. Hispanic voters were leaning toward Trump's economic ideas. Black voters were disillusioned with Biden, thinking that he didn't live up to his promises. But now you've got Kamala Harris in there, and 65% of black voters said they were more motivated to vote in this election. Wow. And that very well could make the difference, especially in states like Georgia, where, if black voters stayed home, if a lot of Atlanta residents stayed home, then the rural Trump base, the Marjorie Taylor Greene's district and things like that, would go for Trump and dominate. But if black voter turnout in Atlanta is now what we expect from seeing this poll 100 days from now, it could be a very different picture.
And of course, as we mentioned, Harris is in Atlanta this evening for a rally. She said on her way there that she has not yet made a decision about a vice presidential pick. And looking at our polling, knowing that the governor of North Carolina, where she is lagging behind Trump, took himself out of consideration on his own last night. And she's also behind in just one other state, Pennsylvania. What is the implication there for potentially thoughts around Governor Josh Shapiro?
Right. Well, that certainly makes him, in play for the vice presidency. Pennsylvania is one of those 3 critical states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that any candidate, Republican or Democrat, has to win in order to get the 270 electoral votes. There are other weird paths, but those 3 are the primary states. So if she's doing well in Michigan and she's doing well in Wisconsin, then she needs to win Pennsylvania. Josh Shapiro is a very popular governor there, a Democratic governor in a state with the legislature is mixed, but he's gotten a lot of bipartisan legislation done. And I think she'll also need to address what Trump is now criticizing her for about remarks she had when she first ran for president in 2019, that she was against fracking, which is huge in Pennsylvania. So she'll have to make up for that. The other thing is, on the vice presidential pick, is she is very vulnerable on immigration and the border. So that makes me look to Arizona, where, yes, she's up by 2 in our poll right now. But Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, is very moderate on immigration and, might also help quash those criticisms from the Trump camp.
We're tight for time. I just have to mention Michigan. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, you see up 11 points.
Yeah.
This, realizing, could be an outlier, but a remarkable number in a state that could decide this election, Wendy.
Absolutely. We were surprised by that number, and it's hard to tell, given the size of the polling, what drove that. Among the things that we saw elsewhere in the poll, though, is that voters trust Harris more to depart a little from Biden's policy on Israel and Gaza. And remember, in Michigan, there was that uncommitted vote largely over Gaza. So Dearborn, Michigan, which has a big Arab population, could go for that. And then, of course, there's the black voter enthusiasm in Detroit.
All right, very good points. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson on this poll day. Thank you so much. Meantime, both the Harris and Trump campaigns launching multi-million-dollar ad buys today. Here's a taste.
The one thing Kamala Harris has always been: fearless.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here.
As a prosecutor, she put murderers and abusers behind bars.
Kamala Harris failed, weak, dangerously liberal.
Joining us now for more is Bloomberg campaign finance reporter Bill Allison. So, Bill, these are pretty big buys, $50 million for the Harris campaign, starting with $12 million for Trump. And what we know is they have still hundreds of millions realistically to work with here.
Yeah, of course. Kamala Harris just raised $200 million in the first week of her campaign as the top of the ticket. They're spending a huge amounts of money in battleground states. Right now, there's like 5 states where about 93% of the spending is concentrated, and that's the blue wall states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. You're also seeing a lot of spending in Arizona and Georgia. And so one of the things, though, is that Trump right now, for the first time in this campaign, in the month of August, he's booked about twice as much time as Harris and the super PAC backing her. So what he's trying to do right now is to define her as quickly as he can while she gets her campaign up and running. They've got to figure out their messaging. They've got to figure out where they're spending. And he has a strategy where, he's just unloading all these ad time in all these battleground states.
Well, it's kind of interesting here. We've got multi-million-dollar ad buys on both sides. And to your point, they're both talking about the same person, Kamala Harris. This is a race to out-identify each other here. You've got Kamala Harris with a biography-style ad today. Donald Trump hitting her as failed, weak, dangerously liberal. Who wins? The messaging war.
Generally speaking, the reason why there are so many negative ads is they tend to work. Now, we haven't seen any negative ads yet from the Democrats and Kamala Harris attacking Donald Trump. And I think that some of those could be very effective with her background as a prosecutor, she can be, I think this is one of her big strengths, and also like her ability to debate. So I think that she can carry that negative message to Trump. But right now, it's, I think it should be a concern for Democrats that, he's got so much on the air and they're behind right now.
And just quickly, Bill, before we let you go, you had a great piece out today looking at one big donor in particular, Ken Griffin, donating a lot to Republicans in congressional races, not yet to Donald Trump, though.
He has stayed out of presidential politics really since 2016, although he did get in. He gave $5 million to Nikki Haley's super PAC. So I shouldn't leave that out. But most of his emphasis has been on congressional races, and he's been spending a lot in primaries trying to shape the kinds of candidates who will come into Congress. And he's looking, broadly speaking, he's looking for candidates who will restore the American dream or extend the American dream. And he's talking about national defense, taxes, business opportunities, and things like that. But, yeah, he's put about $75 million into political campaigns so far this cycle.
Fascinating story with a lot more money to be spent. Great reporting. Bill Allison, thank you so much. The Senate, meantime, passed the Kids Online Safety Act today. Yes, senators are still in town and working. This is a bill that would require social media companies make their platforms safer for kids. The measure now heads to an uncertain future in the House. We talked about it with a big supporter of this legislation, Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn, on the earlier Balance of Power.
There is broad bipartisan support across the body of the House for pushing this forward. I think that you will see House leadership move it to the floor for a vote, and we will get this to the president's desk. There has been an unbelievable coalition of parents and school principals and educators and pediatricians and kids that have said there need to be protections in the virtual space so that we are not subjected to some of these algorithmic rabbit trails.
Joining us now for more, Megan Scully, who leads Bloomberg's congressional coverage. Megan, I don't know about the algorithmic rabbit trails, but there are questions about whether there's a trail here in the House for this bill. What do you think?
So Speaker Johnson has said that he would read the legislation and consider bringing it up. Now, the House is on recess, though, for the next 6 weeks or so, and they're going to be back in September when they have crunch time to get spending legislation done, and lawmakers are going to be eager to return home to campaign once again. So we'll see if this gets through. It has been sort of languishing in the House since the spring, but there is a strong impetus because of the coalition that Senator Blackburn mentioned. There is, however, also a push against it. Groups like the ACLU are concerned about censorship. Tech companies are not behind it. So it is by no means a certainty.
Well, and of course, it's not a certainty either that the Senate will be able to pass more legislation this week when the tax compromise that passed in the House by a wide bipartisan margin goes to the floor. But, Megan, we also have our eye on some congressional primary races, specifically in Arizona today, the 8th congressional district. How close is this one going to be?
That one is going to be close. These primaries that are going on in Arizona are so notable for many reasons, including just the sheer number of candidates on both sides in the various districts. The interesting thing about this race is that Donald Trump has endorsed not one but 2 Republican candidates, both of whom have lost statewide in the last election cycle. You have Blake Masters, who lost the Senate race in 22, and Abe Hamday, who lost the state attorney general race. Trump is a sort of a latecomer to the Masters campaign this time around, so it'll be interesting to see how his sort of last-minute double endorsement plays in that district.
All right, Bloomberg's Megan Scully, thank you so much. And coming up, we'll have more on down-ballot races and the impact of Vice President Harris's candidacy with Democratic Congresswoman Suzan DelBene of Washington, chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Vice President Kamala Harris has excited the community. She's excited the House Democratic Caucus, and she's exciting the country. We're going to hold the Senate. We're going to win the House. We're going to elect Kamala Harris as our next president in November.
That was House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries last week speaking about the nascent candidacy of Vice President Kamala Harris and the impact it's having on the party as a whole. For more on that, joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Suzan DelBene of Washington, chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us. We, of course, have been reporting this hour about a new Bloomberg Morning Consult swing state poll that shows her statistically tied with Donald Trump, actually ahead or neck and neck with him in all states, swing states, that is, other than Pennsylvania and North Carolina. When you are looking at your vulnerable Democratic members in some of these states, what is the Harris effect? Is it a good one?
We have seen just a huge increase in energy all across the country. It's about making sure that we turn out the vote. And when people are energized and they know that they have candidates who are standing up for the issues that they care about, which our Democratic candidates are, they turn out and vote and we win. So this energy has been incredible across the country. You're seeing it at polling, and we're seeing it on the ground in districts across the country.
Well, we're covering a presidential race here and discussing it with you now, of course, Congresswoman, but there's another race underway right now, and that appears to be the race to identify Kamala Harris. And as I'm sure you know, the Trump campaign is out swinging with its first ad today. I know the Harris campaign is out with its own biographical type of message, but the Trump ad calls her failed, weak, and dangerously liberal. What's the counter argument?
Well, I think we have a campaign built on policies, actual work and accomplishments, and they have nothing to run on. Their campaign is Project 2025. It is taking away reproductive freedom across this country, and the voters are against that. In fact, 7 out of 10 voters in battleground districts say that Republicans have the wrong priorities. They hear that. They haven't changed, but we're out there with our message, talking about the work we're doing to help grow and strengthen the middle class, supporting families, protecting reproductive freedom across the country, standing up for our democracy. Voters are with us. And when we get our message out, we win. And we're going to continue to get that message out all across the country.
Well, Congresswoman, on message, given that you just mentioned Project 2025, which, of course, we have heard a lot of Democrats talking about, it is worth noting the director of that stepped down today in the face of, in part, some pushback from the Trump campaign. They released a statement today. This is Chris LaCivita and Susan Wiles saying reports of Project 2025's demise would be greatly welcomed and should serve as notice to anyone or any group trying to misrepresent their influence with President Trump. Congresswoman, what do you say in response to that?
I say it's not surprising that they run away from their agenda, because their agenda is not something supported by the American public. But that's who they are. They want a nationwide abortion ban. We've seen that in vote after vote. They want to cut Social Security and Medicare. We've seen that in policies that they've proposed. They are against voting rights. They are undermining our democracy. So these are not new things from the Republican Party. These are things that they have had as policy priorities for a long time. So it's not surprising they're trying to distance themselves, but at the same time, we're going to hold them accountable for where they really stand. The votes that they've taken, the policies that they've put forward, their extremism, the dysfunction, we're going to hold them accountable for that. And we have a great answer, great candidates who are going to stand up for working families, stand up for the issues that matter most to folks across the country, and stand up for our rights and our freedoms and our democracy.
Well, Congresswoman, you know, our poll also finds that Donald Trump is more trusted when it comes to a number of issues that are important to our audience here on Bloomberg, on managing the stock market, on managing the economy by way of interest rates, the price of goods, and so forth. As chair of the DCCC, you're talking to people on the ground who many of us will never be exposed to during this Democratic cycle. What do you hear from them when it comes to this issue, specifically of inflation and the negative association that they have when it comes to Democrats by way of the Biden administration in these past couple of years? What do you tell them? What would Kamala Harris do differently?
Well, we talk about how important it is that we continue to build a strong economy that works for families. We talk about the issues that are critical, the kitchen table issues, costs. People care about affordability. Housing is a great example. Housing is expensive all across the country. We need more affordable housing. So let's talk about the policies we can put in place to make sure we have more affordable housing across the country. The actual policies that we're trying to move right now, those are critically important. That's what we're talking about. We're talking to families, how we help with childcare, another important expense for families. Things like the child tax credit, the expanded child tax credit that helped reduce poverty across the country and help so many families. Those are policies. We have specific answers, and we know when we talk to families about that, we win their support. So we're going to talk about that and the policies we're putting forward. Republicans are doing nothing. Donald Trump supports a tariff policy that would raise costs for American families. We support lowering costs for American families and making sure we have an economy that works. So we win on that. We need to continue to talk to folks across the country, make sure that they're hearing our message, and also that we're talking and speaking out against the mis and disinformation that's out there.
Well, Congresswoman, finally, as you talk about winning, I'd love to get your expectation onto just how many seats that you could not just win, but flip from currently being held by Republicans. Your Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, in a recent donor email said that your Democrats are targeting 22 Republican-held seats. You, of course, only need to flip 4. But is 22 still the number with Harris at the top of the ticket, or do you think that can go higher?
Well, we're going to play in every district where we have opportunities, and we have 27 red to blue candidates who are running across the country, doing an incredible job. And they are authentic representatives of their district, talking about the issues that matter. So we've been running ahead. We've been outraising Republicans this entire cycle. We're in a very strong position. And we're going to win in places that you don't think about, in places like Alabama and Iowa, Nebraska, Montana, as well as New York and California. We have a big map. We have great candidates, great momentum, and people are supporting our efforts. So we're going to get that message out, and we're going to take back the House in November.
House member still in Washington, Democratic Congresswoman Suzan DelBene, thank you for the time. Of course, chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee tasked with getting Democrats elected in November. We thank you. Coming up, Microsoft shares plunging after the company reported a slowdown in cloud growth. We'll have the latest with Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow and the fallout here in the stock price next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us. Microsoft shares are sinking in after-hours trading after the company beat quarterly estimates on the top and bottom, but posted a slowdown in growth in its Azure cloud service. Joining us now with more is Bloomberg technology co-host Ed Ludlow. Microsoft with a 3 handle, Ed. What are we learning?
I mean, it's just a quarter where you cannot miss estimates or the street's expectations. Azure cloud services growth, top line 29%. The street was looking for 31%. And though Microsoft said there were 8 percentage points of contribution specifically from AI, they looked at the capital expenditures number rising to $19 billion from $14 billion and thought, we see all the money going in or the investment, we don't see money coming out. And that really is the story. Even though it is sustained but slower growth in Azure cloud computing, there will be a lot of questions on the call about when this will come. In other words, money from software sales as a direct result of all of the data center spend, buying high-performance GPUs to train large language models, the investment in OpenAI. Very quick breaking news, Intel, according to our sources, will announce severe job cuts in the coming week, and that is also having an impact on Intel shares in after hours, a story that we'll continue to check.
Yeah, absolutely. You're seeing that move in the post-market. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, the co-host of Bloomberg Technology. Thank you so much. Of course, a lot of tech earnings still ahead this week. And still ahead here on this program, Israel retaliates against Hezbollah for the strike over the weekend that killed 12 young people in the Golan Heights. We'll speak with Jennifer Kavanagh of Defense Priorities about whether this is an escalation or a proportionate response and what this does to the overall tensions in the Middle East as the U.S. warns against pursuing all-out war. We'll have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I want to address what's happened over the last few hours in terms of the Middle East and be very clear. Israel has a right to defend itself, and I unequivocally support Israel's right to remain secure and to defend the security of Israel. What we know in particular is, yes, it has a right to defend itself against a terrorist organization, which is exactly what Hezbollah is. But all of that being said, we still must work on a diplomatic solution to end these attacks, and we will continue to do that work.
Reasserting Israel's right to defend itself, Vice President Kamala Harris there on the tarmac in just the last hour, commenting after Israeli officials confirmed an IDF airstrike in the suburbs of Beirut. That strike targeting a Hezbollah commander claimed to be behind last weekend's attack that killed 12 children and teenagers in the Golan Heights. We talked about it at this time yesterday. Now the response. And we bring in Jennifer Kavanagh, senior fellow at Defense Priorities. Jennifer, it's great to have you here. Israeli officials are signaling they will not escalate this situation further. This is being framed as a test, of course, here domestically for Vice President Kamala Harris, but it's also a test for Benjamin Netanyahu. If that is the end of the response, do you see that as a proportionate one?
Well, I think it is a significant escalation over where we were 24 hours ago. I think many people were hoping for a response that was somewhere in southern Lebanon, maybe in the outskirts of Beirut. And this attack really struck inside of Beirut in a heavily populated area at a symbolically important target for Hezbollah. Its Shura Council, the center of its decision making, as well as a very important commander, which would be a significant loss for the organization. Both in terms of leadership and tactically and operationally. So it is a significant escalation. I think what remains to be seen is how Hezbollah responds, whether their response is to similarly target an Israeli city like Haifa or another city in northern Israel, or whether it is more muted and tries to signal sort of an end to this spiral.
Well, so it does feel like the next move is Hezbollah's for the most part, right, Jennifer? And if we were to see some kind of retaliatory strike against Israel specifically, would you expect we would see a similar reaction to what we saw back in April when Iran sent the drones and missiles and the U.S. and other allies stepped in to interfere?
I think it depends how significant Hezbollah's response is. Secretary Austin, Secretary of Defense, made it clear this morning that the United States would support Israel in defending itself, and that means probably weapon support, as the United States has provided over the past 10 months, but also support, as you mentioned, in terms of air defense and shooting down drones or missiles. If it is assessed that those drones and missiles exceed Israel's capacity to respond itself. So I think that's certainly on the table. It just depends how significant Hezbollah's response is and whether Israel needs that assistance, given the nature of Hezbollah's retaliation.
Jennifer, as our attention is pulled to the north here, we still have questions about what's happening in the south. We know the fact that Bill Burns is back in Rome, that the United States is still seeking to help in some way to achieve a ceasefire with Israel and Hamas. But there has been no news on that since Benjamin Netanyahu left Washington last week. Do you think that we'll see one between now and the election in November?
I have to say I'm not optimistic. There have been many points at which there seem to be breakthroughs that end up falling through. Netanyahu really has no incentive here to conclude a ceasefire in the near term, given the political uncertainty in the United States and the fact that his political survival really depends on the continuation of the war. The only thing that could potentially lead to a lessening of Israeli activities in Gaza is really a decision to shift activities to the north. So if we were to see a drawdown of activities in Gaza, a shift of forces to other parts of the country, refitting of reserve units, mobilization of new troops, that would tend to indicate potentially a shift in focus to a ground incursion into Lebanon, which would be equally bad. I do think that a diplomatic solution is in the best interests of all parties, and probably the only way to stop the escalation and continuing violence between Hezbollah and Israel is to conclude some sort of diplomatic agreement in the south. So really that is the crux of the issue, which is why so much attention is being focused on it.
Yeah, and of course, it was just months ago that we were looking at the Houthi activity in the Red Sea, also talking about how the prospect of a ceasefire may have that proxy backing off some of its activity. So it does seem that a lot hinges on this. But Jennifer, to the point you were just making about political uncertainty in the U.S., we just listened at the top of this segment to the words of Vice President Kamala Harris trying to be stern on this issue and express the support the United States has for Israel. Would you expect her policy to be consistent with what we have seen during this administration as she served as Joe Biden's vice president?
I would expect there to be considerable continuity. She has made it clear that she is potentially more sympathetic towards the suffering of Palestinians than has been expressed by President Biden. And that is partly due, I think, to the nature of her political experience, which has a much shorter duration than Biden's. Biden has a long-standing relationship with Netanyahu that shapes how he thinks about this conflict and the support the U.S. provides. Vice President Harris doesn't have that. It allows her to be a little bit more flexible. But it's important to recognize that her position here, in terms of being a little bit leaning slightly more towards pushing for a ceasefire, is very much in the Democratic mainstream and not really leaning very far left at all. So very sort of consistent with where the party is generally.
You know, it's interesting because we were talking about the fact that Kamala Harris has been largely saying the same things that Joe Biden has been saying. He rolled out the whole ceasefire from the White House. I believe it was the 31st of May, if you can correct me if it was later than that. But he has been saying almost word for word the same things, but interpreted differently when Kamala Harris says them, Jennifer. How come?
Well, I think a little bit of this is people trying to read the tea leaves. Everyone wants to think about what her foreign policy might look like were she to win the election in the fall, and we don't have that much data to go on. So people are reading into every comment that she's made in a way that maybe isn't intended. All the data we have really is her statements from 2019 when she was running for president at that time. And that was 5 years ago. The world looks very different now. And, you know, it's important to recognize that we're not going to have that many data points even before she's elected because she is still the vice president. And she can't really deviate that far from the administration's line.
Well, the vice president is notably not the president, not the commander-in-chief, and not, at least in this instance, as steeped as Joe Biden has been in foreign policy in his half a century of public service in Washington. Jennifer, does she actually have the qualifications for the role from a foreign policy standpoint, just looking at it analytically?
She has had a lot of time in government, and she has been right by Joe Biden's side throughout this through his entire presidency, which has been a very challenging one in terms of foreign policy. And I think it's important to recognize that any president coming in, the first few months is, trial by fire. No president coming in gets to set their foreign policy agenda and follow it to the letter. Every president is confronted with challenges, and really the learning happens once they're in office. So I think the biggest factor in a potential future Harris administration would be who she surrounds herself with, who she hires into those top-level national security positions, and that will help to determine the direction that her administration would take. And Phil Gordon, who is right now her top advisor, has a long career in Democratic administrations and in foreign policy. So I don't have any concerns were she to be elected that she would not be able to handle the challenges she would face.
All right, Jennifer, always great to have you here on Balance of Power. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Jennifer Kavanagh of Defense Priorities. And coming up, we'll be joined by our political panel to react to the breaking Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll we brought you at the top of the hour that shows Harris closing the gap with former President Trump in most of the key 7 swing states. That's next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We have seen just a huge increase in energy all across the country. It's about making sure that we turn out the vote. And when people are energized and they know that they have candidates who are standing up for the issues that they care about, which our Democratic candidates are, they turn out and vote and we win. So this energy has been incredible across the country. You're seeing it at polling, and we're seeing it on the ground in districts across the country.
That was Democratic Congresswoman Suzan DelBene of Washington, chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, earlier this hour, reacting to our new swing state poll, Bloomberg News and Morning Consult, that shows Vice President Kamala Harris closing the gap with Donald Trump. Joining us now for more here on Balance of Power is our political panel, Lisa Camooso Miller, former RNC Communications Director and host of the Friday Reporter podcast, and Kristen Hawn, Democratic strategist and partner at Rokk Solutions. Welcome, ladies. Great to have you both. And what a day to have you as we get this swing state poll out. Of course, this is a very early presidential campaign for Kamala Harris. We're only talking about 8 days old here. And yet our polling suggests she is up 2 points in Arizona and Nevada, tied with Trump in Georgia, up 11 in Michigan. Kristen, only right now behind Trump in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. What do you make of this?
I mean, I think a lot of these states, we're still looking at a statistical tie, so I don't think any Democrats are taking within the margin. But I think it's good news. I mean, there is an enthusiasm. I think I always saw some Trump pollsters saying that it's going to die down. I think that we've been waiting for this type of energy to be injected into the party, and the excitement about the vice president is palpable. And I think you're also going to see it with Chairwoman DelBene talking about the down-ballot effect this is going to have on the Senate races and the House races that people are also paying attention to, because we're looking at control here, control of the legislative branch.
Well, it's interesting because we're talking on aggregate about a statistical tie in the race here, and she made up a lot of ground to get to that point, as you mentioned, Kayleigh. Does that mean that the selection of a running mate could actually lead to a break in one direction or another here once we actually have two complete tickets?
Well, Joe, the one thing that that I've reflected on quite a bit over the course of the last few days is that Donald Trump has had an opportunity over the course of the last really 2 to 3 weeks to really sort of see his numbers and his opportunities really rise with the convention, with the nomination of J.D. Vance and all of these other sort of opportunities. And that went up, and we saw quite a bit of enthusiasm behind him, and then all of a sudden it plummeted. If this poll really reflects sort of the way the electorate feels, and the vice president still has an opportunity to name who her running mate will be, an opportunity to name more. She has more opportunity for more bumps than I think the Republican ticket does now, and I think that it seems to me like perhaps the Republican ticket has peaked very early and perhaps has a long way to go.
Well, as we consider the vice presidential pick, this is actually something that Bloomberg's David Weston spoke about with former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy for Wall Street Week at the Aspen Economic Strategy Group annual meeting. And here's what he had to say about it.
She may look to Arizona thinking she could play out west, right? Deny Trump, Arizona, Nevada, reshape the debate when it comes to the border. Mark Kelly being an astronaut, he's a very interesting candidate. Go to Tim Walz, a manager. I think if she's being a senator, I'd pick a governor, a manager, right? And try to get away from what she's already tried to, those policies.
And if she's looking at governors, Kristen, it is worth pointing out that one of them in one of these swing states has taken himself out of contention. Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina announcing in a statement last night that he is not interested in the job. So if you're looking at data like what we're looking at this evening, listening perhaps to the words of a former speaker, who should the pick be, knowing that there's been reporting she's planning on campaigning with this individual in the swing states next week?
I think it's going to be a personal pick for her. She's got to figure out who she's most comfortable with. I think Kevin McCarthy made a good point about, Mark Kelly is just an extraordinary individual, and he brings a lot to the table. There is he would pick a governor. Maybe she wants to run with another former senator, but I think we've got a lot of really great candidates out there that bring a lot to the table that I think can help her shore up some support where she might have some.
Former President Donald Trump spoke with Fox News yesterday about his opinions on debating Kamala Harris. I want to give you a sense of what he said, and we'll ask you about what could be a major moment on the campaign trail. Here's what he said.
I want to do a debate, but I also can say this. Everybody knows who I am, and now people know who she is. She's a radical left lunatic. She'll destroy our country. She wants open borders.
Then why not debate her?
Well, wait. But because they already know everything. The answer is yes, I'll probably end up debating. But I can also make a case for not doing it.
So we're not too sure what's going to happen here. Lisa, but you talked about the potential for a bump, maybe a couple of them for Kamala Harris. She could own the next couple of weeks with a running mate decision, then the convention. But we remember what happened last time there was a debate. It was not just a bump for Donald Trump. The president of the United States dropped out of the race. Who would the opportunity present itself to in a second?
This is a very different debate, Joe. I mean, this is a former prosecutor. If you all remember well, she held and composed herself very well in a debate against the former vice president. Yeah. She is skilled in this position better than Donald Trump ever will be.
Would you let Donald Trump debate her?
I don't think I would.
Wow.
I think that her discipline is far greater than his, and it would really be a tremendous oppositional visual for America to choose from.
Well, you mentioned her career, her past career as a prosecutor. That was in part the subject of her $50 million ad buy that launched today, talking about her as fearless and who she went against as a prosecutor. We also saw an ad buy from the Trump campaign to the tune of $12 million going after her on issues like the border. When does she need to stop introducing herself to the public with ads and go after Trump like Trump is going after her?
She will have plenty of time to do that. And the Republican ticket needs to be very careful, because if they're not, they will overdo it. They will overreach. They will offend a female African-American candidate for president, and they will undo their own success that has been so far so good for them.
Kayleigh mentioned reports that Kamala Harris is expected to be traveling with a running mate next week, regardless of who it may be. Do we expect an announcement on Monday? Is that kind of where we both are? Lisa, what do you think?
I don't think it comes Monday.
No,
I think I feel like this is a huge vetting process. This is a huge process. So perhaps it will be a trial, perhaps by the end of next week. But Monday seems very short.
I would agree. We've got a short window, but I think probably a little bit after that. There is a vetting process on our side. I'm not sure if there was much of one with J.D. Vance, but,
So everyone's getting over their skis. Coming up, we stick with our panel to look at tonight's Arizona Republican primary. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
So it may be a little bit late. I'm sure the Masters campaign would tell you, boy, we really wish this could have come out, a week, 2 weeks earlier. There's still, several thousand votes yet to be cast, but a lot of those votes were already in the bank prior to the endorsement.
That was Republican strategist John Seaton talking with us on the early edition of Balance of Power today about former President Donald Trump's endorsement of Blake Masters in Arizona's 8th Congressional District, which followed Donald Trump's endorsement of Abe Hamadeh in a crowded primary in the same district. Still with us, our political panel, Lisa Camooso Miller and Kristen Hawn. Forgive my confusion. What happens when Donald Trump endorses two people in the same race?
Well, first off, this is the greatest treat of my day, because I get to be on the same show as John Seaton, who is one of my favorite Republican operatives. So thank you for that gift. But also, too, this is Donald Trump wanting to win. He wants to win. He's going to pick whoever he thinks
when you
is
endorse
going. Everybody. That's right. He wants to win. This is unprecedented. This is exactly how Donald Trump does politics.
Okay, so maybe this particular race won't tell us anything about the power of the Trump endorsement or Trump alignment. Perhaps the margin of victory for Kari Lake could in the Senate Republican primary. She's polling significantly far ahead, but if she doesn't win by a significant margin, Kristen, what might that say?
I mean, I think there's a lot to be said that, a lot of these ballots have already been cast. So, you have to couch the, what you're gathering from this. But, I think it could say a couple things. What I do know is that Ruben Gallego is going to win that race. And I think, him and Kamala, together on a ballot are going to be helpful to each other in this way. So I'm very excited about the outlook in Arizona.
You think he's going to win the general, not just his primary?
Yes.
Do you feel the same way? That would be a pretty big deal for Arizona.
Arizona's funny. Kristen probably knows a lot about what's going on behind the scenes on the Democratic ticket. And Kari Lake obviously makes traditional Republicans like myself a little bit nervous for a lot of other reasons beyond the fact that she is who she is. But I also know that the state is really sort of the battle between Phoenix and Tucson, and how this is, in some ways, there's a really strong MAGA movement that's happening in Arizona. So it'll be interesting to watch how that all plays out.
But John Seaton also told us today that in Arizona, the issue is the border. Yeah. And traditionally, that hasn't been a winning issue for Democrats, Kristen.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where if, people are looking to, if you have a Mark Kelly on the ticket, or even, one of these other governors on the ticket who haven't been tied to the administration's perceived, policies, that could be really helpful in these states as well.
Well, that's really important then. So if Kamala Harris were to make that selection, this is the biggest cudgel they have against the Harris campaign is the border. What would the impact of Senator Kelly be?
Well, I think it would be big, and I think if you're in the Democratic Party, you're looking at that as a possibility of another open seat in a state that really, really matters and really, really counts. But I will tell you that I also talked to operative friends of mine in Arizona, and they are terrified at the idea of Mark Kelly being the choice, because he is absolutely the best possible guy to go against a J.D. Vance in a debate.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Well, an excellent point. I guess we'll see if the vice presidential debate will happen. Finally, Kristen, in our final moment with you, knowing that we're talking about actual swing states here and candidates like Mark Kelly for VP, should that take Tim Walz in Minnesota, which isn't technically one of the swing states we're considering, out of contention?
I mean, I think that he's a really strong governor. So I think you look at people who run their states. I don't think it should take him totally out of contention, but I do think it makes Mark Kelly a much stronger candidate.
Well, she only has days to decide, so we'll be talking about who it is officially before too long. Lisa Camooso Miller and Kristen Hawn, our political panel this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, for more coverage of our Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
You know, when Kamala Harris does announce her running mate, we'll have it for you right here. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.